when a frightened man arrives at Wolfe's door with a death note in his pocket, the night turns darker than the city outside. Welcome to Nero Wolfe and the broker who wouldn't live till morning. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Subscribe so you never miss the next mystery from the Brownstone. Nero Wolfe and the Murderer in the Brownstone. The doorbell rang at 10:47, a sound so out of place it might have been an accusation. Night in the Brownstone is a sacred thing. The orchids asleep upstairs, Wolfe in his chair conducting mental court with a bottle of beer, and me halfway through taking off my tie. That chime cut through the quiet like a hypochondriac's last breath. I was in the hall before Fritz could appear, mostly because I didn't want the poor man fainting if it turned out to be an axe murderer with a sense of formality. When I swung the door open, the guy standing there looked as if the axe had already made a pass at him. Tall, soft-shouldered, pale around the edges, and holding an envelope like it contained a live snake. "Mr. Wolfe," he blurted, voice vibrating. "I must see Mr. Wolfe immediately. It's a matter of life and death." "Well, you're in luck," I told him. "You've come to the right house for both." He blinked, unamused, so I let him in before his knees went on strike. The living room lighting spilled a polite glow as I led him toward Wolfe's office. His shoes made that expensive hush you only hear from people who don't usually walk anywhere. When we entered, Wolfe looked up from the globe on his desk, like a man disturbed at the last page of a rare book. He was in his yellow silk house jacket, the kind that could make a cardinal feel underdressed. The faint perfume of orchids drifted in from upstairs, their bedtime aroma, and the clock ticked in quiet protest. "Mr. Draper," I said, improvising a name since introductions hadn't yet been offered, "claims the fate of the world depends on seeing you right now." Wolfe didn't move an inch, which was still more activity than I'd expected. His eyes, deep and disinterested, assessed the man as one might evaluate an unfamiliar cheese. "Your identity, sir?" he inquired. The stranger gulped air. "Arnold Draper. I'm a broker. Madison Avenue." He held out the envelope. "This is for you. Please. I'm in danger." Wolfe flicked 2 fingers toward me, the signal for escort service. I took the envelope and placed it on the desk blotter. It was cream stock, heavy, expensive, sealed with red wax stamped AD, and the words, "For Nero Wolfe's eyes only," in trembling ink. I cracked it open under Wolfe's raised brow and extracted a single folded sheet. The handwriting was neat, accountant precise. "Someone intends to kill me. The threat came tonight. I was told I would die here." I whistled softly. "You've got style, Mr. Draper. Most men just send fruit baskets." Wolfe gave me the glare he reserves for impertinence during business hours. "You are overwrought," he told Draper. "You were informed you would die here, meaning this Brownstone." "Yes, this address. I don't know how they knew, but—" Draper's voice cracked. "I was told it would happen before morning." I leaned against the desk, studying him. The sweat on his temples was genuine, not decorative. "If you're being hunted, Mr. Draper, you picked an unusual foxhole." "I was told only you could stop it." He opened his briefcase with fumbling fingers, pulled out a check, and laid it on the desk like a sacrament. $10,000 retainer. That made Wolfe's eyelids twitch, the closest thing to surprise since Prohibition ended. He regarded the paper, then the man. "Mr. Draper, you arrive unannounced at an unseemly hour, bearing melodrama and an impressive check. I abhor both. Still," he extended a reluctant hand. "Archie, the beer." It was like watching a mountain decide to budge. I fetched the bottle from the sideboard, poured it into a chilled glass and placed it before him. He sipped, letting the foam settle his principles. "Proceed, Mr. Draper. Brevity is the courtesy of the desperate." Draper reached for the phone with a shaky hand. "May I?" he asked. I slid it toward him, and he dialed, listened to nothing for 3 seconds, then set the receiver down as Wolfe's eyebrow rose like a stop sign. Draper explained in jerks and fragments. He managed investments for high-end clients in the real estate trade. A week ago, he discovered that several of his clients were shell companies transferring ownership of brownstones through fake tenants, names lifted from obituaries. When he threatened exposure, the warnings began. Anonymous calls, 1 bullet in his mailbox, and tonight, a voice on the phone saying his death would happen here. "Why here?" Wolfe asked. "I don't know. They said this house was chosen." Ridiculous. Wolfe wiped his fingers with a napkin as if removing the man's panic by proxy. "No assassin schedules his venue through correspondence," I said, "unless it's a social killer, the kind that likes RSVPs." Wolfe ignored me. "Have you informed the police?" I can't. The money involved. There are powerful people." That old refrain again. Powerful people allergic to sunlight. I watched Wolfe's expression tighten just enough to suggest he was tempted. He had a rule about fools with wallets, but 10,000 was a persuasive argument, even against aesthetic distaste. At length he sighed through his nose. "Very well. I will endure this inconvenience until dawn. Archie, record his statement and see that Mr. Draper's identification is verified. Mr. Draper, you may remain here tonight if your fear requires sanctuary." No, I'll go home. I shouldn't bring danger upon you." "Phooey. Danger rarely keeps appointments." I finished taking notes, keeping my tone light to balance the funereal mood. "Just don't stop at any shooting galleries on the way home." Draper forced a smile that looked like it cost him. He gathered his briefcase, nodded awkwardly to Wolfe, and let me walk him to the door. The night air outside was cold and clean, too clean for Manhattan. A cab prowled the curb, headlights smearing gold across the wet pavement. "Good night, Mr. Goodwin, and thank you." "Sure, try to make it a long one." When I shut the door, the brownstone felt heavier. I went back to the office. Wolfe hadn't moved, but the air around him seemed to have thickened like slow syrup. He held the check up to the light. "A man of caution who fears for his life," he mused. "And yet he chooses solitude over protection. What do you infer?" "That he's either lying or stupid. My vote's still out." Wolfe glanced up. "You are romanticizing melodrama. The man is frightened, not fascinating." 10 to 1 he won't make breakfast," I said. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "I never wager on human folly. It is too consistent." He handed me the envelope and letter. "File that, and remind me to deposit the check, provided its author still draws breath tomorrow." I tucked the papers away and leaned against the filing cabinet. If this turns out to be another of those society shell games, I'm taking hazard pay. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, signaling dismissal. I turned off the main light, leaving him haloed in the desk lamp's gold. He looked like some ancient oracle waiting for a question nobody wanted answered. At 8:30 the next morning, I was midway through my first coffee when the phone on Wolfe's desk began to jangle. I beat him to it. "Nero Wolfe's residence. Goodwin speaking." The voice on the other end was brisk, official, and familiar. "Goodwin, this is Kramer. Put Wolfe on, now." "Good morning to you too, Inspector. Breakfast disagree with you?" "Cut the comedy. Did a guy named Arnold Draper pay you a visit last night?" I straightened. "He did? Why?" "He's dead. Found shot in his study about 2 hours ago. And before you start rehearsing your denials, we found his fingerprints on your boss's phone." That landed like a slap from a cold hand. "You're sure?" "I don't call for fun, Goodwin. Meet me at Draper's in a couple of hours, and tell Wolfe not to pull his orchid hour routine." I hung up slowly. Wolfe, who had been sipping coffee and ignoring the world from behind the morning paper, lowered it just enough to peer over the edge. "Inspector Kramer," I said. "He's sending himself over. Draper's dead." Wolfe's eyelids flickered. "Ah. Shot. And they found his prints on our phone." Wolfe folded the paper neatly, placed it aside, and pressed the bell cord once. From the kitchen doorway came Fritz's composed figure, tray in hand. Wolfe spoke without looking up. "Fritz, another pot of coffee. Mr. Goodwin and I will require it." "Yes, sir." As Fritz departed, Wolfe leaned back, interlaced his fingers, and contemplated me with the serenity of a man watching someone else's hangman. "Well, Archie, you have your wager. I trust you're satisfied." "Not quite," I said. "I'd rather collect the 10 grand than the corpse." He grunted, which from him was practically affection. "You are incorrigible. Prepare the office for visitors. We shall be obliged to endure the inspector's company." I went to open the windows a crack. Outside, New York was stretching awake, innocent as only a city full of sinners can be at breakfast. The morning light fell across Wolfe's desk, glinting off the untouched glass of beer waiting for noon. Another client dead before services rendered. Another riddle delivered with interest. I looked back at Wolfe. Looks like our house guest kept his appointment after all. Wolfe's reply was soft, measured, and cold enough to chill the room. "Then, Archie, it appears we are next upon the schedule." He reached for the phone, the same one with Draper's prints, and with perfect calm said, "Inform Inspector Kramer that we await him." By 9:30 I was at Draper's Brownstone on West 37th. The place was already wearing the full regalia of official death, squad car out front, reporters milling like pigeons, and a couple of uniformed cops keeping the curious from getting smarter. Inside smelled of burnt coffee, flashbulbs, and something expensive that had gone sour overnight. Stebbins met me at the door. "Goodwin. Figures you'd show up before the undertaker." "I like to beat the rush," I said. "Kramer in?" He grunted and led me down a hall lined with gloomy portraits of people who'd never had to explain themselves to homicide. The study door was open, and Kramer stood near the desk, hat pushed back, cigar unlit, but doing its best to smoke on reputation alone. He didn't look up. "Wolfe send you to tidy up his end of things?" "I'm strictly the tourist today. Thought I'd see how the city's hospitality's doing." He turned then, eyes bleary but sharp. "You were with Draper last night?" "He came to us. Said somebody planned to kill him. Wolfe told him to stay put. He went home instead." Kramer grunted. "Yeah, well, he was right about one thing." He nodded toward the body slumped behind the desk. Draper looked smaller without the panic. One hand still dangled near the blotter, the other halfway to the drawer where the gun wasn't. .32 caliber. No prints on the weapon. Found on the floor. Will run ballistics." "Neat work," I said. "You thinking suicide or guessed with bad manners?" "I'm thinking Wolfe's name in the book and Draper's prints on Wolfe's phone aren't coincidence, but I also know Wolfe wouldn't shoot his own advertisement." That was as close to a compliment as Kramer ever got before lunch. I walked the room while the flashbulbs popped. The decor shouted successful broker trying to impress timid investors, walnut panelling, a decanter on the sideboard, a wall of ledgers. Still, something didn't fit. The fireplace smelled faintly of burned paper, and in the grate lay half of a letter, the edges crisped. The visible line read, "Can't protect you if you keep," and then ashes. Over the mantel hung a clean rectangle of lighter wallpaper where a picture had once been. "Lose a masterpiece?" I asked. Kramer eyed me. "You always narrate your sightseeing." "Occupational hazard. Somebody took that picture last night. Frame dust's fresh." He muttered around the cigar. "Noted. Anything else from your crystal ball?" "Yeah. Wolfe doesn't smoke imported cigars, except his particular brand from Havana. Smell that?" I pointed toward Draper's desk. "Same aroma. Somebody smoked one here last night." Kramer frowned. "Wolfe hasn't left that chair of his in 20 years. "Exactly. So whoever it was wanted us to think he did." He grunted again. Standard Kramer for interesting, but I won't admit it. A uniform entered. "Neighbours here, sir." "Send her," Kramer said. The woman who stepped in could have been 40 or 30, depending on the lighting and her conscience. She wore a fur-collared coat and a green felt hat with a brim sharp enough to slice bread. Kramer gestured. "Mrs. Finch lives next door, says she heard voices." She nodded briskly. "Yes, around 9:30. Mr. Draper was arguing with a woman, right outside his door. I looked from the window. She wore that colour hat." "See her face?" I asked. "No, but she was slender, dark hair, good posture. The kind of woman who knows what she wants." Kramer scribbled. "Thanks, ma'am. That'll be all." When she left, I said, "Green hat. Draper's wife, maybe?" Kramer grimaced. "Separated. Sylvia Draper, lives uptown. We'll check. Don't spread it." "Who? Me?" My lips are sealed tighter than your cigar case. He gave me a look that could steam clams. "Listen, Goodwin. If Wolfe's got anything to add, he calls me direct. No fancy orations." "Sure thing. He's composing one already. Something in Latin, probably." Kramer snapped the notebook shut. "I'm getting the warrant for Draper's files. You clear out." I did, but not before noting one more curiosity. On the blotter, beneath Draper's lifeless hand, a tiny oval of moisture, like from the base of a glass. Beer, maybe, or Wolfe's brand of chilled bottle. Or maybe I was seeing patterns where there were only accidents. Red herrings swim fast in this business. Back at the Brownstone, Fritz met me in the hallway with the aroma of roast chicken and thyme trailing like a halo. Lunch hour was approaching, and even homicide didn't interfere with Wolfe's digestive schedule. In the office, Wolfe sat behind his desk, eyes closed, fingers templed. The world could burn as long as his mealtime remained punctual. I dropped my hat and started the report. "Draper's officially dead. Shot sometime before 3. Kramer found your name in his appointment book and his prints on our phone. Somebody also left a cigar that smells suspiciously familiar. Wolfe opened one eye. I do not smoke in other men's houses, Archie. I know that, but somebody wants it to look like you do. Ah. He shut the eye again. Imposture is the last refuge of the unimaginative. Neighbour says he argued with a woman in a green hat. Sylvia Draper's the prime suspect. He reached for a peach from the fruit bowl and examined it as if cross-examining a hostile witness. A green hat. Tennyson used the colour green to symbolize decay. Apt. Sure. And Kramer's using it to symbolize motive. He's thinking jealous wife, domestic quarrel, bang. Wolfe bit into the peach, the juice perilously close to his vest. Domesticity breeds tragedy more reliably than avarice. Yet, I doubt Mrs. Draper performed execution at 3 a.m. without alarming her conscience. She might have been asleep in it, I said. Those fur-collared types can manage miracles. He ignored that. Did you observe the environment? Yeah, burned letter, missing picture frame, no check, no weapon prints, and one damp ring on the blotter. Beer, he said instantly. He drank before dying. Americans often anesthetize their doom. Could have been his killer's glass. Possibly, but what interests me, Archie, is the cigar, an affectation calculated to suggest my presence. His eyes sharpened. That implies forethought, not impulse. Meaning Draper's death was scheduled like a board meeting. Precisely. Fritz appeared in the doorway, silver tray in hand. Lunch, gentlemen. Wolfe inclined his head. Set it here, Fritz. We require sustenance before inference. Fritz arranged the roast chicken, creamed spinach, and baked apples with a reverence suitable for an altar. When he left, Wolfe regarded the spread gravely. Kramer will, of course, attempt to tether me to this absurdity. He's already polishing the leash. Wolfe carved his chicken. He must. It is his métier. Yet he is no fool. He will see the improbability. I poured water. He said, quote, if Wolfe's mixed up in this, it's by invitation, not accident. That's almost polite. A brief, deep hum escaped Wolfe, approval's nearest cousin. Inspector Kramer grows older and marginally wiser. Commendable. He ate slowly, eyes distant. Fools die for their secrets, not their sins, he said at last. I raised an eyebrow. You expecting applause, or shall I embroider it for the office wall? It is an observation, not a sermon. His fingers twitched toward the bell cord, his version of pacing the floor. Archie, we will require information on Mrs. Draper's whereabouts last night and the full roster of her husband's business associates. Saul, Fred, or Ori? Saul. Discretion will be necessary. I have no wish to see our Brownstone in the Gazette before dessert. Right, I said. And if Kramer shows up before dessert? Then you will seat him, politely, and inform him I am indisposed until 4 o'clock. Orchid hour, I said. Naturally. He closed his knife with precision. A man may postpone many things, Archie, but not routine. It is the skeleton of sanity. I grinned. If sanity's your skeleton, I hope it never takes a walk. He didn't answer. The fingers near the bell cord flexed once more, quick, almost nervous, like the tremor of a thought he didn't want seen. Then he reached for the glass of beer Fritz had just placed beside the plate. Outside, the city hummed its usual discord, but in the Brownstone, ritual and deduction were already setting the next move. Draper was dead, and Wolfe's world had been touched by a lie carried on imported cigar smoke. And if there's one thing Nero Wolfe can't abide, it's counterfeit, whether in money, manners, or murder. The doorman at the Park Avenue building gave me a look that said grief had a dress code and I wasn't wearing it. I smiled like a florist at Easter and asked for Mrs. Sylvia Draper. He phoned upstairs with the kind of discretion that makes millionaires sleep, and at 1:12 p.m. the elevator slid open with the hush of an apology. A maid with better posture than most judges led me down a hall where everything was beige, soft, and expensive, like money trying to look modest. She was waiting in a drawing room that could have hosted a coronation if the royals didn't mind mirrors. Sylvia Draper had the sort of composure you could iron shirts on, black dress without a crease, a thin gold bracelet that ticked when she moved, eyes like smoke behind careful lashes. She offered a hand that knew exactly how long to shake. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, and I pretended not to be surprised that she knew my name. A woman like that collected names the way museums collect donors. "Please, coffee?" "I never say no unless it's poisoned," I told her, "but I like to watch the cup first." The smile flashed and went away, a professional courtesy. She poured. The percolator smelled rich and foreign. The cups were porcelain thin enough to make you pity the saucers. I let the coffee touch my lip like a handshake and kept my eyes moving. A widow's flat tells the truth even when the widow doesn't. "My husband," she began, and the two words landed between us like a fragile vase, "was not well. He frightened easily. He imagined enemies." "Enemies imagined him too," I said. "One of them had a 32 and a plan." Her fingers fixed themselves around the cup. "The police suggested you and Mr. Wolfe were involved. I told them that was absurd." The tone said she could turn absurd into extinct, given time. "Wolfe is allergic to leaving home, and to murderers tracking mud on the office rug," I said. "We discourage both." She set her cup down with exactly the sound a spoon makes when it chooses discretion. The room had the scent of lilies that had been told to behave. On the mantel, a photograph in a silver frame showed Arnold Draper with 3 other men, all in suits that knew what they cost. One oval of the picture had been cut away sharply with scissors, leaving a neat moon of emptiness where a face should be. It was the kind of omission that drew the eye the way a missing tooth does a smile. "You were separated," I said. "That makes alibis a group activity." "I was at a reception at the Carlton," she replied without pause. "From 9 until 11. There were 200 guests and 3 orchestras. At midnight, I was home. I have staff." "Staff tell the truth when they're paid for it," I said, "but sometimes they tell it to the wrong person." She sighed. "This isn't a friendly call, is it, Mr. Goodwin?" "I'm friendly," I said. "I'm just also punctual, and your husband's killer keeps good time." Her eyes cooled a degree. If smoke can look amused, hers did. "Arnold's business made him anxious. He lost money for people who hate losing, and he promised to make it back with deals that never quite landed. Someone was angry. That's the entire story." "Stories with edges trimmed never hold," I said. "Who's the fellow missing from the photo?" Her gaze didn't flicker, which told me it had tried to and been caught. "A man who no longer belongs in this house." "Name?" "A mistake." "I like mistakes," I said. "They make the best clues." She stood and crossed to the mantel. Up close, the frame showed fingerprint smears that weren't hers. She wore gloves the colour of storm clouds. She adjusted it a fraction, the universal gesture of people who want to fix the past by moving objects a quarter inch. He invested with Arnold. They had a disagreement. Over what? Over money, which is the only thing men ever truly disagree over. She turned and the smoke in her eyes thinned. "Mr. Goodwin, my husband called me at 9:20 yesterday evening. He said there might be trouble and that I should leave town for a week. Then he laughed and apologized for his imagination. He was always dramatic." "I have it on authority that drama was warranted," I said. "He also visited us with a warning addressed to Wolfe in handwriting steady enough to sign a treaty." She came back to her chair and sat, crossing one ankle with an elegance that could have gotten its own byline. "Then your Mr. Wolfe will solve it." "He prefers to solve things without me getting punched," I said. "So help me let him." Her mouth tipped. "You're charming when you're unreasonable." "I exercise," I told her. "Now tell me about the green hat." A thin line appeared between her brows, an editor's mark. "What green hat?" "Neighbours heard your husband arguing with a woman wearing one at 9:30 outside his door. Green felt, good posture, dark hair. Those details ring?" She shook her head once, very carefully. "I own a green hat. So do half the women in Manhattan. I was nowhere near Arnold's house. I can produce names." "Names are valuable," I said. "But sometimes they bounce." I let the silence sit until it got heavy. "Who warned him to die in our brownstone?" "Die where?" She blinked. If it was an act, it was Broadway quality. "He told us last night he'd been promised death at Wolfe's address. A joke with rough edges." "That's grotesque," she said softly, and real worry peeked through like a hem. She leaned forward. The bracelet ticked. "Do you think someone meant to implicate you?" "Lady," I said, "someone already set the table and wrote out place cards." She looked toward the window where Park Avenue pretended civilization. "Arnold brought danger home," she said. He always insisted danger looked better in a tuxedo. Some people like their trouble tailored, I agreed. Now your husband keep private stationery? Of course. Stamped envelopes? Yes. May I see the desk? I asked it as if I expected a no. It's a trick. People reach for a yes when they smell refusal forming. She considered, then nodded and led me to a small inner room that had all the warmth of a financial statement. The desk was mahogany, the lamp green-shaded, and the blotter immaculate in a way blotters shouldn't be if they've met ink. On the right-hand drawer were the neat pens and an ivory-handled letter opener shaped like a dagger someone forgot to sharpen. She opened a left drawer and took out a bundle of envelopes tied with white ribbon. Here. They matched the one Draper had delivered to Wolfe down to the heavy cream and the engraved return address. One envelope lay loose at the back, unsealed and empty, addressed in Draper's hand to himself. I kept my fingers off it. I bent, read, and gave the facts a room in my head. Thank you, I said. I won't touch original property. If the police want a love letter to a stationery store, they can ask nicely. She watched me with a nucleus of suspicion forming behind the smoke. Are you collecting curiosities, Mr. Goodwin, or truth? Both, if they come in a set. I looked around. On a side table sat a bowl of silver change and a taxi chit stamped yesterday's date. Next to it, a folded theatre programme from the Carlton's ballroom. You keep souvenirs? A friend left those, she said. It was the wrong temperature for the answer. Name of the friend? A lady I don't wish to involve. Red herring, I said cheerfully. Thank you. She let that pass. The maid entered with fresh coffee and a tray that said the kitchen earned its keep. I took a second cup to prove I could drink and think simultaneously. The room made a quiet that wasn't calm. Mrs. Draper, I said, your husband handled syndicate money. If he found something crooked, he may have waved it under a nose that doesn't like drafts. If that nose belongs to a man whose face used to be in your photo, I need his name today, not after he finishes his next appointment. She stared at the cut oval as if it might grow back a face out of sheer will. If I give you his name, she said slowly, do I become the instrument of a scandal? You become the instrument of not being accused, I said. Kramer is already winding up a fastball with your initials on it. Her mouth flattened. Arnold's former associate, she said finally, was Philip Tarrant, an attorney. They quarrelled over a property reassignment last month. Arnold accused him of falsifying tenant rosters to move deeds through the back door. Mr. Tarrant was offended. Some men take offence the way boxers take the bell, I said. Do you have his address? She hesitated, then crossed to a small telephone stand and wrote it on a card from a stack printed with her name. The script flowed like a dancer. She handed it over. I slid it into my notebook. Paperwork beats keep memory honest and juries calmer. Did Arnold have a safe deposit box? Yes, at the Claremont Trust. Combination to his home safe? In his head. He didn't trust paper, or me. There was no heat to it, just weather. We went back to the drawing room. The mirrors had been watching politics while we were gone. I finished the coffee and set the cup down where the saucer wouldn't cry. One more thing, I said. Last night at 9:20, he told you to leave town. Did he name a reason? He said only that he had made a mistake that would correct itself if I were not here to see it. She folded her hands lightly. Arnold believed in neat endings. I never trusted them. Smart, I said. Neat endings require a mop. Her chin lifted a fraction. Will Mr. Wolfe protect you from the police, Mr. Goodwin? He prefers to protect me from my own bright ideas. The police already believe in me. That's our mutual tragedy. She smiled without warmth. Then tell your Mr. Wolfe this. I didn't kill my husband, and I won't be ruined for his mistakes. The bracelet ticked again, a metronome for resolve. Find whoever is using your employer's name as a stage. I intend to, I said. And if it helps, I like your hat. I didn't wear one, she said. Today. At 12:37, I left her apartment with Tarrant's address, a mental photograph of a missing face and a sensation you get after a well-played chess opening, the uneasy certainty that the board is tilted. The doorman tipped me a look that suggested widows rated better than gumshoes, and the noon traffic tried to shave my kneecaps. I phoned the Brownstone from a pay booth and caught no answer. Orchid hour wasn't until 4, but Wolfe sometimes practiced for it by ignoring bells early. I taxied home through a city, pretending to be honest for lunch. In the office, the air had the preprandial calm of a church waiting for the sermon. Wolfe sat where the map of him never changes. Fritz appeared at the doorway with the tray just as I stepped in, proving that Providence sometimes schedules with Swiss accuracy. "Lunch is served," he said, and vanished like a polite ghost. "Report," Wolfe said. He didn't look at the chicken cutlets, which meant he was hungry for something else. I gave him the ride in one stream, the smoke-eyed widow with a carload of poise, the photograph with a face neatly amputated, the empty envelope addressed by Draper to himself, the taxi chit, the friend who left nothing but doubt, the name of Philip Tarrant and his address, the safe deposit box, and the line about leaving town for the sake of tidy corrections. Wolfe's lids came down halfway. Appearances, control, self-preservation. He pinched the bridge of his nose and added, almost tenderly, Manhattan's favourite trinity. "You're having a crush on contradictions," I said. "The lady says he was paranoid and theatrical. The evidence says he rehearsed his own warning." Wolfe turned his head slowly, the way a planet considers a moon. "Archie, you court idiocy as though it paid dividends. Her charmeuse is armour. Her grief is rationed. Yet she did not lie about one thing." "Which?" "She is afraid, but not of the police, of the loss of standing. The green hat is a decoy." "Red Herring admitted and congratulated," I said. "Shall I fetch Saul for Tarrant?" "At once," Wolfe said. "Have Mr. Panther inquire into Mr. Tarrant's debts and appetites, and telephone the Claremont Trust for their hours." "It's Wednesday. They close early," I said. 1 o'clock on the dot." I glanced at the clock. "Which is in 3 minutes." Wolfe sniffed. "Then lunch will precede banking, as it should. Eat." We did. The cutlets were perfect, and the spinach knew its place. Wolfe ate like a man paying respect to a cathedral. When the plates were cleared, he rang the bell cord once. Fritz returned with chilled beer, placed one glass by Wolfe and ginger ale by me. Wolfe's glance at the ginger ale was the kind of protectiveness he'd deny with his last breath. He likes to keep me sparking, not toasted. I rose, moved to the typewriter and hammered out a clean memo. Sylvia Draper interview. Notes. Dates, times, names, and the line about neat endings that bleed. Filing truth while it's warm keeps it from wandering off. Wolfe listened to the keys like a metronome he approved of. When I finished, he said, "Archie." "Yeah?" "A murderer who sends warnings in his own hand, writes confessions in invisible ink," he murmured. "We will require the reagent." "Meaning?" "Meaning Philip Tarrant, or another of that odious circle, will reveal himself when pressed. On money. They always do." I fetched my hat. "Saul first, then the bank." "Go," he said. "And Archie." He paused, and for him that was affection with a ribbon. "Use caution." "I always do," I lied. "It just doesn't always notice." He made a small sound that might have been a laugh if he translated from Wolfe. I left him with the beer and the bell cord and the orchids waiting upstairs for their 4 o'clock audience, and I took the stairs 2 at a time toward a city that preferred its truth trim to fit a frame. Somewhere a green hat was hanging on a hook, pretending to be innocent. The bracelet's tick kept time in my head as I went to find the face that belonged in the cutout. The kind of place where businessmen gather to gamble after office hours always smells faintly of cigars, ambition, and disinfectant, like sin that's been dry cleaned. The Hanover Club was no exception. The carpet was thick enough to hide bodies, and the portraits of long-dead donors glared down as if appalled at the living. I'd come as a guest of Philip Tarrant, attorney at law and collector of IOUs he didn't plan to pay. He met me near the coat check, slick and smiling, hair brushed with arithmetic precision. "Goodwin," he said, "you said you might like a seat at the table. Nothing serious, of course." "Nothing ever is," I told him, "until somebody folds." He chuckled like a man trying to prove he still had lungs. The table held 4 others, real estate men with polished shoes and grins that stopped at the molars. Draper had run with them, traded deals and gossip, and now, apparently, one of them had traded him in. I took my chair, stacked my chips, and waited for conversation to do what cards couldn't. For the first half hour, the talk was all numbers, whiskey, and wives who spent too much. By the second drink, the veneer thinned. The one called Kendall, pink-faced and perspiring, muttered, "I told Draper he was asking for it, shaking down friends." Tarrant's smile froze. "You're drunk." "Maybe. But he had those deeds, didn't he? The ones with forged tenants, your handiwork." The table stiffened like a jury hearing its own verdict. I drew a card and said lightly, "Forged deeds? Sounds like a parlour trick." Kendall realised he'd stepped on a rake. "Figure of speech," he said quickly. "You know how brokers joke." "Sure," I said. "All the time, usually before the cops show up." Tarrant changed the subject with surgical precision, and the game limped on, but the slip was enough. When the pot ended, I cashed out, claiming an appointment with an ulcer. Outside, the night wind off the East River had the bite of unpaid rent. I ducked into a diner booth and phoned Saul Panzer, who'd been shadowing Tarrant since noon. "Our boy likes his club smoky and his friends nervous," I said. One of them hinted Draper was blackmailing Tarrant with forged deeds. Saul's voice, flat as a ledger, replied, "He just made a call from the club payphone, number traced to Claremont Trust. Spoke 2 minutes, then burned a paper in the ashtray." "Nice habit," I said. "Stay with him till he turns in. I'll brief Wolfe." Back at the Brownstone, the smell of Fritz's veal aspic drifted from the kitchen like peace after war. Wolfe was in his chair, dictionary open, looking as if the English language had disappointed him again. I handed him the shorthand notes. He read, eyebrows lifting one at a time. "They called themselves financiers," he murmured. "You called them, what was it? Second-hand pickpockets with better neckties." "I try to keep my poetry balanced," I said. "Anyway, one of them admitted Draper was blackmailing someone over forged deeds." "Mr. Tarrant," Wolfe said, tapping the page. "Plainly, did you recover anything tangible?" I laid a folded slip on his desk, a photostat Saul had picked from Tarrant's discarded envelope. It was a cancelled check for $20,000, Draper's signature scrawled across it, and a small notation, "B.S. Room." Wolfe stared at it as though it had recited Shakespeare. "Not a person's initials, an abbreviation, basement strong room." "Draper's house has one," I said. "I saw the steel door yesterday." "Indeed." He rang the bell cord. "Fritz, telephone Inspector Kramer. Inform him Mr. Wolfe requires a police escort to Mr. Draper's basement." I raised an eyebrow. "Planning a field trip? That'll be the day." He gave me the patient look reserved for particularly slow mammals. "You will go, accompanied by Mr. Kramer. I shall remain in possession of my sanity." By the time Kramer's car rolled up, the rain had started, making the city look washed but not clean. He climbed out, hat low, cigar clamped in place, and eyed me like I'd sold him a dud tip. Wolfe's bright idea this time. "The check," I said. "Basement strongroom. He thinks Draper parked something down there worth killing for." "Or emptied it himself," Kramer said. "Come on." At Draper's house, the lock was standard, but the door behind it wasn't. It was half-inch steel with a new dent near the handle. Stebbins worked it open with police keys and grunted, "Empty." He wasn't exaggerating. The room was cleaner than a politician's memory. Bare shelves, open safe, dust that hadn't settled yet. "Looks like somebody beat us," I said. Kramer bent, examined the lock. "Tool marks are fresh and don't match Draper's timeline," Stebbins said. "Somebody cleaned this out after he was dead." "Or after," I said. Nothing left but questions. He turned, eyes narrowed. "You telling me Wolfe tipped you to this before we found it empty?" "Lucky guess." "Phooey," he said, and for a second he even sounded like Wolfe. "You tell him from me, he's still got that check to explain." "He's got a theory percolating." "He always does. Off the record." Kramer straightened, lowering his voice. "Ballistics came back. Bullet was a .32. The widow owns one. We can't prove it's the same, but it stinks." "That's one word for marriage," I said. He ignored me, pocketing his notebook. "Tell Wolfe I'll hold the press for a few hours. But if he's sitting on something, he'd better make it sing." Back at the Brownstone, the rain had upgraded to moral instruction. Wolfe sat where I'd left him, untouched beer at his elbow. He listened without interruption as I gave the report, from the empty strongroom to Kramer's quiet confession. When I finished, he leaned back, fingertips pressed together. A .32, belonging to the widow. A room once full, now void. Money changing hands for silence. The pattern is insultingly clear. "Then enlighten the stupid," I said. Was Draper blackmailing his own wife? No. His tone could have frozen boiling water. He blackmailed an associate who feared exposure enough to stage both theft and death, Mrs. Draper's weapon was borrowed to supply plausible guilt. Elegant, but not perfect. Then who emptied the strong room? Whoever Tarrant called before he burned that paper. You will obtain the call record. Sure, I said. And while I'm at it, I'll borrow J. Edgar's phone book. He gave me a glacial stare. Your sarcasm is infantile, yet I indulge it since it denotes vitality. Much obliged, I said. Any orders before orchid hour? Yes. He drew the check toward him, tapping the notation. Inform Mr. Pantzer to discover who holds the lease on the basement next to Draper's. If the strong room is empty, its twin may not be. He closed his eyes, signalling dismissal. And Archie, convey to Inspector Kramer my appreciation for his discretion. It is, I admit, a professional grace I rarely encounter. That was Wolfe's version of a thank you note. I picked up my hat. You sure you don't want to step out and inspect the crime scene yourself? His eyes flicked open. Archie, if I desired mud on my shoes, I would buy a farm. Good night. As I went out, I heard the faint ding of the bell cord summoning Fritz, and the unmistakable pop of a beer cap. Wolfe's evening benediction on a city that never learned how to stay clean. The note came early, delivered with the kind of timing that makes you suspect malice keeps its own calendar. I found it at 8:30, lying on the marble inside our front door where Fritz had just finished polishing. The envelope was plain, no return address, but the handwriting had attitude, cramped, deliberate, and angry. I tore it open. Inside, the words were few and cheerful. He warned you. Now keep out or join him. For a second, I just stood there, coffee in hand, wondering whether to laugh or phone the bomb squad. Then I carried it into Wolfe's office, where he was already seated behind the desk, performing his morning ritual of disdain for mankind. Message from a secret admirer, I said, handing it over. He read it once, raised one heavy brow, and said, Phooey. Then he folded the note with exaggerated care and slid it into a drawer. I suppose you're going to tell me to keep out, I said. I am, Wolfe replied. We are being cautioned, not invited. I intend to heed the distinction. I gave him a look. If I had a nickel for every time you saved my life against my will, I'd buy a brewery. He ignored the remark and reached for the key that locked the office door. Click. That sound always feels like civilization putting on handcuffs. You will not leave this house on business, he said. Our adversary's reach is long, and your wit, though serviceable, is not bulletproof. That's flattering, I said. You'll make me blush right through my funeral suit. He shot me a glare. Archie. Yeah? Cease the irreverence. I require silence to think. Silence, I said, the only thing that ever kills me. By 10, Wolfe was upstairs among the orchids, brooding like Hamlet with fertilizer. I typed up notes from the Draper interviews and stared at the clock. The message under the door was still needling me. Whoever sent it knew too much. About us, about Draper, maybe even about the missing check. And Wolfe's definition of safety didn't include curiosity, which left me on my own. At 10:43, when Fritz began clattering in the kitchen for lunch prep, I slipped out. Wolfe's orchid hour was sacred, and my odds of detection were lower than a priest's sins. The Claremont Trust on East 54th was the kind of bank that could make you feel guilty just for having money. I used Draper's safety deposit authorization card, recovered from his desk by Kramer's men and photostatted for records, to bluff my way in. The clerk was all politeness and pinstripes. Apparently my smile outranked suspicion. The box itself was number 214, small and neat, the sort of container that either holds treasure or trouble. Inside were 2 items, a ledger and a single photograph. The ledger listed property transfers in tidy columns, brownstones, apartments, warehouses, all moved through a carousel of shell companies with names as bland as pudding. But what made the air go colder was the photograph. It showed our brownstone, Wolfe's own house on West 35th, shot from across the street, early morning light, no people. On the back, in faint pencil, Tenant W. Brown, paid through broker. I didn't need a séance to guess Draper's game. Someone had been laundering real estate deeds through dummy tenants, and one of them was us. Our address was being used as a cover in the same scam Draper had been trying to expose or profit from. That was when the red herring arrived in my brain. Maybe Draper had planned to frame Wolfe. It sounded wrong, too theatrical even for murder, but I filed it. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it, thanked the universe for cameras not yet being invented for every hallway, and left with a smile that could have passed inspection. When I got home, Wolfe was waiting. That meant I hadn't been as stealthy as I'd hoped. He was seated, hands steepled, a faint trace of disappointment on his face. Fritz hovered behind him like a silent butler statue. "You were absent," Wolfe said. "I was restless," I said. "Restlessness is healthy." "For a cat, perhaps, not for my assistant." I dropped into the red chair. "I went to the bank." He made a sound halfway between a growl and a sigh. "I warned you. And I brought you something you'll like." I laid the photostat of the ledger and the description of the photo on his desk. He took them without a word, eyes moving line by line. When he reached the note about the photograph, his eyebrows lifted. "Someone," he said, "has been remarkably insolent." "Yeah, renting our brownstone without telling the landlord." He nodded slowly. "Draper's brokerage managed shell transfers. Whoever killed him now controls those papers. This photograph is a placeholder, a false identity for the property itself. It suggests that Wolfe and Goodwin occupy not a home, but a cipher." "Charming," I said. "Next time the taxman comes, we can tell him we're fictional." Wolfe's glare could have frozen steam. "Archie, this jesting is unworthy. Property, like power, requires ownership. Someone is erasing ownership, replacing names with phantoms. Draper stumbled on it. He died for it." "And we're next on the letterhead?" He gave a short nod. "Possibly." At that moment, the bell rang, hard, insistent. Fritz went to answer. 30 seconds later, Inspector Kramer stomped into the office like a thundercloud in a trench coat. "Wolfe," he barked, "I'm tired of being led in circles. You sit here puffing while the city's paying overtime." Wolfe gestured delicately toward a chair. "Sit, Inspector, you vibrate." Kramer stayed standing. "Cut it. I've got a warrant ready to search this place. You can cooperate or fight it." "You may serve it," Wolfe said calmly, "but it will waste your time. Emotion, Inspector, is no substitute for cognition." Kramer's jaw worked around an unlit cigar. "Don't try your lecture act. I know Draper's connection to you wasn't friendly, and I know his wife's gun was the weapon. What I don't know is why your address turned up in his files." "That," Wolfe said, "is precisely what we shall determine, assuming you refrain from trampling logic under procedure." I said, "He's saying we're in the same boat, Inspector, except ours has upholstery." Kramer turned to me. "Goodwin, you keep this clown show running. You'll both drown in red tape." Wolfe's voice cut across like a blade through butter. "Mr. Goodwin acts under my instruction. You will not impugn him again." For a second, the room went still. Kramer's eyes flicked to Wolfe, then to me, and softened by about 1/2 millimeter. "All right," he said gruffly. "I'll hold the warrant for 24 hours, but if you're hiding something, I'll make it a week in court." He slammed the door on his way out, the echo leaving the air raw. Wolfe leaned back, shut his eyes, and tugged the bell cord once. Fritz appeared at the doorway with the precision of Swiss engineering. "Beer," Wolfe said simply. When Fritz returned, Wolfe raised the chilled glass in his slow, ritual salute to reason. "Archie," he said, "inform Mr. Pantzer I require a list of all parties who profit when men disappear from deeds." I grinned. "Saul will love that. Sounds like a scavenger hunt for lawyers." Wolfe's eyes opened just enough to glimmer. "It is, Archie, and I propose we start with the ghosts who claim to live in our own home." He drank, and the foam caught the light like truth waiting to be named. By 10 that night, the streets had that damp Manhattan shine that makes sin look respectable. Ori and I sat parked 1/2 a block from a shabby accounting office on East 43rd, waiting for Harlan Vickery, the man who apparently rented Wolfe's brownstone on paper. The irony of that wasn't lost on me. If Wolfe ever found out someone had used our address for fraud, he'd have that man sautéed and served with Fritz's béarnaise. Vickery finally emerged, a narrow, colourless fellow in a grey suit that had lost its ambition years ago. He carried a tan briefcase like it contained the Ark of the Covenant. Ori muttered, "That's our boy," and started the car. We trailed him through midtown traffic, the kind that honks first and thinks later. At 47th, Vickery flagged a cab. He climbed in. We followed. 2 lights later, the cab stopped suddenly. When we pulled alongside, the driver was shouting at nobody. Vickery had vanished. The door still swung open like a ghost's exit. On the seat sat the briefcase. Ori swore softly. "That's not good." "No," I said, "but it's convenient." Back in the car, I cracked it open. Inside were columns of numbers and one loose ledger page in Draper's handwriting. Same precise loops, same ink, but with a new addition scrawled at the bottom, Sylvia D. That was enough to curdle the night air. Draper's widow again. A hidden flap in the lining held something smaller, a receipt for .32 caliber ammunition and a cleaning kit, dated the day before Draper's death. I whistled. Our accountant liked his assets liquid and loaded. We drove back through fog that smelled like burnt oil and bad conscience. At the Brownstone, Wolfe was waiting in the office, beer in hand, expression midway between disgust and diagnosis. I gave him the briefcase and the rundown. He read the receipt, set it down with surgical distaste. "A woman who inherits a fortune by fraud," he said, "may inherit peril with it." "Or vice versa," I said. "Vickery's gone, Draper's dead, and the lady's name keeps showing up like an unpaid bill." Wolfe's glare could have peeled varnish. "Your wit compensates for your imprudence, but only barely. Following such men alone invites calamity." "I had Ori," I said. "He's good company, and even better cover. Phooey, he is oxygen to your recklessness." He poured another glass of beer, full and cold, then, in what passed for affection, left it untouched beside my chair. His idea of tenderness was rationing restraint. I leaned back, sipped mine, and said, "So, boss, what's the moral this time?" He frowned toward the window. "In Manhattan, Mr. Goodwin, nothing is ever rented without a hidden cost." And in the silence that followed, the city outside kept paying it, one body at a time. By the time I reached the Brownstone breakfast table, the city was already chewing on tragedy with its morning toast. The Gazette headline shouted in type big enough to bruise, "Broker's partner found dead in hotel." Beneath, in smaller print that tried to pretend it wasn't gossip, ran the name Philip Tarrant, lawyer, liar, and the man who had been playing poker with Draper's ghosts. Wolfe sat across from me, dressed as usual in his version of full battle regalia, yellow silk robe, thick brows arched like fortifications. Fritz was clearing the plates with silent efficiency, though he looked faintly scandalized at the idea that murder had dared interrupt breakfast. "I told you Tarrant was brittle," I said, tapping the headline. "Looks like somebody tested the theory." Wolfe grunted. "Strangulation," he murmured, reading. "The crudest form of erasure. It lacks artistry." "Yeah, but it gets results," I said. "The police think it's connected." "They will," Wolfe replied. "Two corpses, one circle. The second eliminates the first's echo. A man who silences another to bury guilt must silence again to bury evidence." That was pure Wolfe, half sermon, half symphony. He gestured at me with the folded paper. "Mr. Goodwin, your presence is requested at the Hotel Collingwood. Pose as a reporter. The Gazette's name will open doors." "Sure," I said, standing. "Just don't expect them to roll out the red carpet for a man with ink on his shoes." He waved me off. "Ink is preferable to blood. And Archie, obtain something tangible. Rumour is the currency of fools." The Hotel Collingwood was the kind of establishment that looked cheaper the harder it tried not to. The lobby smelled of disinfectant and cigars, with wallpaper that had seen more scandal than cleaning solvent. I flashed my Gazette credentials, smiled like sin in a necktie, and got a chambermaid with nerves like violin strings. She twisted her apron as she talked. "It was awful, sir. Mr. Tarrant, he was such a polite man, never caused trouble, but last night there was a noise and then quiet again. This morning I found him on the carpet." "Strangled," I said. "With what?" She swallowed. "His own necktie." "Efficient recycling," I muttered. "Anything else left behind?" Her eyes flicked toward a cart outside the door. From a linen shelf she produced a green hat, tilted, feminine, with a silk ribbon that looked too elegant for the setting. "He wasn't the type to wear that," she said quickly. "A lady must have been here." "The hat had better taste than the head that wore it," I said, lifting it carefully. "You didn't see her?" "No, sir. Only the smell of perfume. Lavender." Lavender again. Draper's wife favoured the same scent. It followed this case like a calling card. I thanked her, dropped a $10 bill that got me a smile, and left before the real press caught on. Outside, I dialed Kramer from a payphone. His voice came through like sandpaper on steel. "You're ahead of me, Goodwin. We found Tarrant's prints and Draper's old ledger fragments in his room. You holding out on me?" "Only an accessory," I said. "A green hat. Smells like lavender and trouble." Kramer exhaled heavily. "Don't kid me. You think it's the widow?" "I think she's either playing dumb or playing dead. Hard to tell from this distance." "Fine," he said. "Tell Wolfe I'll be over at 3. Maybe by then he'll stop treating me like an unpaid intern." "Dream big, Inspector," I said, and hung up. Back at the Brownstone, the office had that cozy quiet that comes right before a thunderstorm. Wolfe was at his desk, eyes closed, fingertips touching. He looked more like a cathedral gargoyle than a detective, but experience said the brain behind those eyelids was slicing through facts like a scalpel. I placed the hat on the blotter in front of him. He opened one eye. "Ah, a woman's folly." "A chambermaid found it in Tarrant's hotel room," I said. "You can guess which woman." He examined the ribbon delicately, turning it with the care of a man reading hieroglyphics. "Mrs. Draper's taste is commendable. Her discretion, less so. Maybe she dropped it by accident." "There are no accidents, only lapses of intention," he said. "Tarrant's death clarifies our murderer's logic. Draper was blackmailing his associate. The associate removes Draper. When the widow threatens exposure, the same hand removes Tarrant and leaves her scent to divert suspicion. A most conventional deceit." "That's almost disappointing," I said. "I expected something exotic. Maybe a secret twin." He frowned. "Romance is a perverse addiction, Archie, even in homicide." Before I could reply, the bell rang. Fritz appeared, immaculate as always. "Inspector Kramer, sir." Kramer entered like a man who'd been fighting gravity all morning. His trench coat looked tired, his eyes more so. He dropped his hat on the rack and took out a cigar without lighting it. "Wolfe," he said, "I'm too old for this merry-go-round. You're ahead of me, and I hate it." Wolfe gestured toward the chair. "Not ahead, Inspector, merely less encumbered by red tape." Kramer grunted. "You're a philosopher. I'm a cop. My desk is covered in corpses. You've got orchids." "Yes," Wolfe said. "They do not lie." Kramer's gaze shifted to the green hat on the desk. "Is that what I think it is?" "It is precisely what you think it is," Wolfe said. "The lure in our trap. But I would advise discretion until the string is tied." Kramer's jaw worked around the cigar. "If you're right about the widow being framed, I'll eat that hat." "Please don't," I said. "It probably costs more than your annual budget." He gave me a look that could have wilted orchids. "Keep your jokes, Goodwin. Just tell me when the killing stops." "When Wolfe tells me," I said. That earned a grunt of respect, Kramer's version of applause. He rose, pocketed the unlit cigar, and said to Wolfe, "You'll keep me posted?" "I always do, Inspector. Whether you enjoy it is irrelevant." Kramer left, the door shutting softly behind him, leaving the faint smell of tobacco and fatigue in his wake. Wolfe stared at the hat again. His thumb traced the silk ribbon with almost tender precision. "This, Archie," he said finally, "is the thread that ties their frame together." "Neat," I said. "And who's hanging from it?" "That," Wolfe murmured, "depends on who tightens the knot first." He reached for his beer, and I reached for my notepad. Outside, the city roared, unbothered by the fact that somewhere beneath its noise, someone was already planning the next murder headline. By late afternoon, Wolfe had sent invitations, polite as subpoenas, summoning Mrs. Draper, Kramer, and the remaining investors to dine at 8. Dinner at Nero Wolfe's was never casual, but that night it had the flavour of a last meal. Fritz had outdone himself. Veal in white wine, asparagus that could have posed for a fashion spread, and a sauce that would have made the angels resign from heaven to apply for kitchen duty. But nobody tasted much of it. The dining room was too quiet, and Wolfe's silence had the weight of a sermon waiting for a sinner. At the far end of the table sat Mrs. Draper, black silk, pale face, and eyes that had learned not to blink. To her right, Inspector Kramer looked like a man handcuffed to diplomacy. His cigar remained unlit out of respect, or fear of Fritz's glare. Beside him were the 3 surviving investors, Kendall sweating into his napkin, Harland, who looked like a man trying to disappear into his collar, and Tarrant's junior partner, the one now without a senior. I was in my usual seat, within arm's reach of the brandy in case the conversation got fatal. Wolfe had eaten with glacial precision, every bite measured, every silence longer than the last. Finally, As Fritz cleared the plates and brought coffee, Wolfe dabbed his lips with a napkin and spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "you may consider yourselves fortunate. Dinner was excellent. The same cannot be said for your alibis." Kendall choked on his coffee. Harland coughed like a man auditioning for sympathy. Only Mrs. Draper didn't move. Wolfe's gaze shifted to her. "Madam, I regret the necessity of this charade, but truth prefers good lighting and a full stomach." Kramer shifted, jaw working. "If this is theatre, Wolfe, I'm missing the script." "Indeed," Wolfe said mildly. "Your police reports are prologues without climax. Allow me to supply the missing act." I'll say this for Wolfe. When he decides to start the show, he doesn't need a spotlight. He leaned back, hands folded over his waistline like a sleeping cat that had just remembered it was a tiger. "Arnold Draper," he began, "was engaged in blackmail. His victims were the gentlemen at this table whose properties were reassigned through a sequence of fraudulent deeds. Each document listed tenants who had died years earlier. An elegant scheme, except for one slip." He lifted a file from beside his chair and passed it to me. I carried it around the table like communion. "In this ledger," Wolfe continued, "one of the false tenants is traced to my own address, the Brownstone on West 35th. Naturally, I took offence." That got a nervous chuckle from Harland, who swallowed it when Wolfe's eyes met his. "The document," Wolfe went on, "was prepared by an attorney, Mrs. Draper's attorney, acting under her instructions. Would you care to explain, madam?" For a long second, the only sound was the clink of Kramer setting down his cup. Then Mrs. Draper spoke, voice steady but thin. I didn't kill him, I swear that. I only wanted to protect someone." Kramer's chair creaked. "Protect who?" Her hands trembled in her lap. "Philip Tarrant." That name hit the table like a bad hand in poker. Kendall exhaled sharply. Wolfe inclined his head as though acknowledging an overdue confession. "He was being blackmailed," she said. "Arnold found out about the forged deeds. Philip begged me to help him hide the files. Said it was all business mistakes, nothing criminal. I believed him." Her voice cracked, and I passed her a glass of water before Fritz could. She took it, nodding faintly. "I didn't know he killed Arnold," she said. "Not until the papers this morning." Kramer sighed. Not angry, just tired. "You realize, Mrs. Draper, that's obstruction of justice." She gave him a faint smile. "Justice or revenge?" Wolfe interrupted softly. "Neither. Merely an attempt at survival." He looked at Kramer. "Patience, Inspector. The true killer has not yet spoken." Kramer frowned. "Meaning what? The lady just confessed to aiding and abetting." "Assisting deceit, not murder," Wolfe said curtly. "You are an able policeman, but your appetite for closure is gluttonous." Kramer grunted, half amusement, half irritation. "You've got 5 people in this room who all had motive. Which one are you saving for dessert?" Wolfe ignored him. "Mr. Kendall," he said, turning slightly. "You protested Draper's demands. You claimed ignorance of the forged deeds, yet one of the signatures in the file matches your secretary's hand." Kendall's face went grey. "That's ridiculous. My secretary wouldn't forge tenants for your speculative properties." "No, perhaps not willingly." Wolfe's tone could have sliced marble. "But Draper had evidence. He used it to extract money. When he threatened exposure, you panicked. You confronted him. Unfortunately for you, Mr. Tarrant was already there, with Mrs. Draper's misplaced loyalty as his shield." Kramer looked from Wolfe to Kendall, then to me. "You hearing this?" "I'm hearing music," I said. "Wolfe's kind. All strings, no drums." Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, savouring his own argument like a fine wine. "Tarrant murdered Draper to erase the blackmail. Then, when I began connecting his name through the false tenant, he silenced himself, or rather, arranged for silence. The garrote on his neck was staged by an accomplice to mimic suicide." "Accomplice?" I said. "He had help dying?" "Of course. A man can sign his death warrant, but not tie it around his throat." That got a grunt of admiration from Kramer. "You've got a name?" Wolfe opened his eyes, the faintest gleam behind them. "Not yet, but I have a lever. The documents Mrs. Draper hid will expose who withdrew funds from the forged property accounts. Money, Inspector, is a more honest witness than men." Kramer rubbed his forehead. "Fine. I'll get a subpoena on those accounts first thing." No, Wolfe said. You will wait until I summon you. Move too soon, and the guilty will vanish again. Kramer's jaw tightened, but he nodded once. All right, Wolfe, I'll wait. But if this blows up, then it will blow in my house, and I shall sweep it myself. That shut everyone up. Even Fritz, who entered just then with dessert, poached pears and syrup, moved like a man walking on tiptoe through dynamite. Wolfe gestured faintly. Eat. It may be your last pleasant meal in this house. Nobody lifted a spoon. When the guests finally left, escorted by Kramer's weary authority, Wolfe and I were alone again. He reached for the coffee pot and refilled his cup. Well, I said, that was cheerful. Next time maybe serve arsenic with the veal. Save time. He ignored me, staring into his cup as if divining the future. Archie, he said quietly, summon Mr. Panther. We baited the trap. Now we wait for the rat to move. Great, I said. And while we wait, he tugged the bell cord. Beer. That was Wolfe. Justice brewing, one chilled glass at a time. Midtown after midnight is a bad place to find honesty. I'd been tracing the call for 20 minutes and every ringing payphone sounded like trouble rehearsing. The voice on Wolfe's line had been cool, even amused. You'll never prove it. That was all. No name, just confidence. I'd been halfway through my nightly ritual of pretending to work when it came in. Wolfe had been reading in his chair, that heavy look of absorption he saves for things that confirm his low opinion of humanity. The words froze him mid-page. He didn't even reach for the beer. Now, the rain was tapping the glass on a phone booth near 48th when Saul Panther's flat voice came through the receiver. Got him. Vickery. He left the booth 5 minutes ago, heading downtown on foot. Alone? I asked. Alone, Saul said, and looking like a man who's just remembered he forgot to hide the body. That was enough for me. I told him to shadow the guy, hung up, and turned the heron toward home. Wolfe had ordered me not to chase ghosts after midnight, but this wasn't a ghost. It was a man who'd made the mistake of thinking Wolfe didn't exist after dark. When I got back, Fritz met me at the door, face pinched with disapproval. He didn't have to speak. His silence said, You're tracking mud on the moral carpet again. Upstairs, the office smelled of orchids and waiting. Wolfe was still at his desk, hands steepled, eyes half-closed. Saul's on him, I said. Vickery's the caller. I anticipated as much, Wolfe murmured. He has reached the stage where conscience mistakes itself for cleverness. He's heading this way, I said. Saul's trailing. Then prepare the office. I moved fast, set out the ashtray Wolfe never used, straightened the guest chair, and checked that the window latch was secure. Wolfe doesn't believe in drafts during revelations. At 1:07 a.m., the doorbell rang. Fritz answered, escorted Vickery in, and withdrew without a sound. Harlan Vickery looked like the ghost of payroll fraud. His face had the drained, shiny look of a man who'd been sweating too long under a lie. The collar of his raincoat sagged, his eyes jittered from Fritz to Wolfe to me. You called, Wolfe said. His tone was mild, but it could have frozen soup. Look, I didn't mean... Wolfe lifted a finger. Spare us improvisation. You phoned to measure my progress. That was unwise. Vickery dropped into the chair opposite him, clutching his briefcase like a drowning man hugging a log. You think you know everything. Not everything, Wolfe said. Only enough to render your position untenable. I stayed standing behind Vickery, leaning against the wall, arms folded. The room felt tight. 4 walls, 1 truth, and a man trying to wriggle out through the keyhole. Wolfe continued, his voice low and deliberate. Draper's ledger lists transactions that exist nowhere else, except in your own handwriting on the forged tenant deeds. Draper discovered the embezzlement. He confronted you, and you silenced him. The weapon, a .32 revolver purchased under Mrs. Draper's name, was paid for in cash you withdrew that morning. That's a lie, Vickery snapped. You can't prove... Mr. Goodwin, Wolfe said, not looking at me. The photostat. I took it from the drawer and laid it on the desk. The black and white image of the gun receipt glared under the lamp like a fingerprint on conscience. Draper died that evening, Wolfe said. Later, when Tarrant threatened to expose the same trail to protect himself, you strangled him. A crude repetition, but desperation has no imagination. Vickery's fingers twitched toward his briefcase. I put a hand on his shoulder, gently enough to be polite, firmly enough to remind him where he was. Wolfe's tone softened, almost pitying. You chose strangulation because it required no weapon traceable to you. A pity that you left your print on the silk ribbon of Mrs. Draper's hat. That stopped him cold. His mouth opened, then shut again. I could almost hear the gears grinding. "You're bluffing," he whispered. "Pfui," Wolfe said. "If I were bluffing, you'd be bold enough to deny. Instead, you're calculating whether silence is still useful. It isn't." The wall clock ticked twice before Vickery spoke again. "You don't know what it's like," he muttered. "Draper was going to ruin me. I fixed the books, yes, but he made me do it. He said everyone was doing it." Then he turned on me. "The classic lament," Wolfe said. "The corrupter becomes the conscience. You killed him not for justice, but for hypocrisy." Vickery's eyes darted toward me. "You believe this? He's just guessing." I grinned. "If he were guessing, you wouldn't be sweating through your collar." That earned me a glare from Wolfe, but I'd earned worse. Fritz entered quietly with a tray, coffee for me, beer for Wolfe, and a glass of water for the suspect. Wolfe nodded approval. "Thank you, Fritz. You may retire." When the door shut, Wolfe addressed Vickery again. "You attempted to frame Mrs. Draper, expecting the police to relish a scandal. You used her gun, her scent, even her husband's records. You cut your own face from the photograph to obscure your link, unaware that absence is itself an identifier." Vickery looked up sharply. "That photo? How?" "From your briefcase, which you so carelessly abandoned," Wolfe said. "Your image had been excised. Draper kept it for a reason, to remind himself whom he trusted least." I watched the man's face crumble like wet plaster. He slumped, rubbing his forehead. "I didn't mean to kill him. It was an argument. He said he'd go to the police. I panicked." "There," Wolfe murmured. "We arrive at the inevitable confession. Mr. Goodwin, note the time." 1:41 a.m., I said, pulling out my notepad. Wolfe leaned back, eyes half closed. "Inspector Kramer will wish to confirm this under less comfortable conditions." Vickery jerked upright. "You can't call him. He'll—" The phone on Wolfe's desk buzzed before I could move. Fritz's voice came from the hall. "Inspector Kramer, sir." I smiled. Speak of the devil, and the doorbell rings. Kramer entered a minute later, trench coat damp, cigar clamped between teeth. He took one look at Vickery and said, "Well, I'll be damned. I was headed here anyway." "Fortuitous," Wolfe said. "We were about to conclude." Kramer turned to me. "You get this one to talk?" "Mostly him," I said, jerking a thumb toward Wolfe. "I just kept the air from escaping." Kramer grunted and faced Vickery. "All right, let's have it." The accountant looked finished. "It's true," he said dully. "I killed Draper. He was blackmailing me over the forged deeds. Then I killed Tarrant because he was next to talk. The rest, you know." Kramer wrote it down, jaw set. "You've just made my night shorter." Wolfe stirred. "Inspector, allow me to formalize the record." He gestured toward the desk. "The evidence includes Draper's ledger, the revolver receipt, and the altered photograph. They establish the architecture of deceit, fragile yet load-bearing enough to hang him." Kramer pocketed his notebook. "You always make it sound like art, Wolfe, but I'll take it. We'll get the signed statement downtown." "Take Mr. Vickery," Wolfe said. "Mr. Goodwin will accompany you as witness." Vickery stood slowly. His eyes found Wolfe's. "You think you're better than us?" he muttered. Wolfe's reply was soft. "No, merely less cowardly." Kramer led him out, nodding once at me. It wasn't gratitude, more like relief disguised as professionalism. The door closed behind them. For a moment the Brownstone was silent except for the hum of the city outside and the slow tick of the clock. Wolfe poured the rest of his beer, lifted it, and stared into the amber surface as if it were a mirror of human folly. "You know," I said, "you could have gone easier on him. The guy cracked before the coffee got cold." "He earned no mercy," Wolfe said. "He corrupted structure, the moral architecture of trust. When a man tampers with foundations, the house collapses on everyone inside." "That's poetic," I said. "You sure you're not moonlighting for the Gazette?" He didn't answer. He reached for the bell cord and gave it a firm pull. Fritz reappeared, precise as ever. "Open the window, please," Wolfe said. "The air has been contaminated by deceit." I crossed and unlatched it instead. The cool night air drifted in, carrying the hum of Manhattan, taxis, rain, and somewhere, the sound of sirens fading toward justice. Wolfe nodded slightly. "Thank you, Archie." That was as close as he'd ever get to sentiment. I leaned on the sill, watching the streetlights smear the wet pavement. "You know," I said, "for a man who never leaves the house, you make quite a dent in the outside world." He closed his eyes. "Archie, cease talking nonsense, and shut the window before the orchids catch cold." I grinned, closed it halfway, and said, "Sure, boss, but if orchids could talk, they'd thank you. You just uprooted another weed." He harumphed, lifted his beer, and drank. And that was the end of it. Another night, another confession, another fragile truth set back on its foundation. Morning in the Brownstone is like waking up inside a well-fed conscience, quiet, polished, and faintly smug. The city outside might have been chewing on horns and headlines, but inside, Fritz's coffee smelled like redemption, and the only sound was the reassuring click of Wolfe's fork meeting china. Wolfe was halfway through an omelette that looked as if the hen had died happy when the phone rang. He frowned as if it had personally insulted the sanctity of breakfast. I got up to answer before Fritz could appear with a frying pan and an expression. "Brownstone," I said. "Goodwin, it's Kramer." His voice had the usual gravel, but there was less fire behind it. "Vic resigned just after dawn. It's airtight. You got him clean." I grinned. "We aim to please, Inspector." There was a pause, then, "Tell Wolfe he was right. Don't make me say it twice." I turned toward the table. "He says you were right." Wolfe didn't look up. "Of course I was," Kramer snorted through the line. "He also says that cleanliness is next to godliness," Wolfe finished smoothly, "or solvency, whichever you prefer." Kramer chuckled dryly. "Solvency works. Oh, and the DA's office will issue a public statement clearing the Draper woman. She'll walk before noon." "Justice tardy is justice marred," Wolfe said, "but acceptable." Kramer exhaled. "You're impossible, Wolfe, but you make my paperwork easier." He hung up before Wolfe could thank him, not that he would have. I replaced the receiver and went back to the table. "So," I said, pouring myself more coffee, "you've been officially praised by a man who considers politeness a moral hazard." "Archie," Wolfe said, cutting into his omelette with surgical precision, "Inspector Kramer's hostility is the armor of conscience. It protects him from admiration." "That's deep," I said. "You could embroider it on a towel." He gave me the kind of glare that's half discipline, half affection. I've come to consider it my morning vitamin. By the time Fritz appeared to clear the plates, Wolfe had shifted into what I call postprandial philosophy mode. He leaned back, fingers steepled, eyes half-lidded like a man composing scripture. "Archie," he said, "I regret that our compensation for this case will be modest." I set down my cup. "Modest? The Draper estate owes us enough to refinish the roof, restock the cellar, and maybe install a revolving door for Kramer." He sniffed. "Remuneration is incidental. Satisfaction is priceless." "Yeah, well, try paying the electric bill with satisfaction. Consolidated Edison's never been known for appreciating moral currency." "Pfui, you are incorrigible." "That's what keeps me employed." He reached for the morning paper, unfolded it with his usual air of judicial restraint, and studied the front page. The Gazette headline did us justice for once. "Wolfe cracks double murder, accountant confesses." Beneath that, Lon Cohen's byline. I'd have to send the man a decent bottle of scotch before he decided I was hogging his exclusives again. Wolfe scanned the column, his expression unchanging. "At least they spelled my name correctly this time," he murmured. "That's progress," I said. "Next they'll admit you have legs." He ignored me. "You will deposit Mrs. Draper's check this morning." "I already did," I said. "Before breakfast. I figured it'd be safer in a bank than under your paperweights." "Commendable initiative," he said dryly. "Thank you," I said, bowing. "I live to serve art and solvency." He folded the newspaper and set it aside with a little sigh that meant he'd decided civilization might survive another day. The orchids were waiting upstairs for their morning sermon, and I could tell by the tilt of his eyebrows that he was mentally timing his elevator ascent. At exactly 9 he rose, slow, deliberate, like a ship leaving harbour, and said, "Fritz, my schedule remains inviolate." "Yes, sir," Fritz replied from the doorway. When Wolfe had disappeared into the elevator, I leaned back and watched the doors close. For a man who despised movement, he sure made an exit look stately. By noon, the case had officially gone from tragedy to the trivia. The radio on my desk burbled out the news of Sylvia Draper's release, followed by a weather report that promised sunshine and humility, both rare commodities in Manhattan. I typed up the final notes for the files, labeling the folder "The Murderer in the Brownstone," because poetic justice deserved a headline of its own. Around 1 o'clock, Fritz summoned me to lunch with his usual quiet authority. The table was set with cold roast beef, butter rolls, and a salad so precise it looked drafted by compass. Wolfe entered precisely 1 minute later, freshly shaven and ready to forgive the world for existing. He took his seat, poured himself beer, and said, "Mr. Goodwin, has the bank confirmed the deposit?" "Yes, sir. The check cleared. So did my doubts about capitalism." He gave me a patient look. "Archie, you possess many virtues. Fiscal modesty is not among them." "I'm working on it," I said. "Maybe you could raise my salary to help." He waved a hand. "Your salary is sufficient." "For what, exactly? Patience training?" "For companionship," he said, so simply that it disarmed me. I stared. "You mean emotional companionship?" He frowned. "Don't be absurd. Verbal companionship. You are a most efficient interlocutor, though at times regrettably prolix." "That's me," I said, "the human run-on sentence." Fritz arrived then with a dish of pickled beets, cutting short what might have turned into the first genuine compliment Wolfe had ever given me. We ate in the comfortable silence that only comes from cases solved, bank accounts replenished, and consciences clean. Wolfe's appetite had returned to its full orchestral range, and Fritz beamed like a conductor who'd just heard perfection. After dessert, apple tart with cream, Wolfe pushed back from the table. "Archie, my beer." I fetched it from the sideboard, poured it into the frosted glass, and handed it over. He accepted it gravely, lifted it in silent acknowledgement of the universe, and took a long, contemplative sip. "I've often wondered," I said, "what you'd do without beer." "Perish," he said simply. Later, back in the office, the sunlight slanted across the Persian rug, turning dust motes into lazy performers. Wolfe was in his chair again, his expression serene, the kind of serenity that comes only after proving the universe wrong and yourself right in the same week. I sat at my desk, sorting through papers that didn't need sorting. "You realize," I said, "we just cleared a murder without leaving home, again." "That," Wolfe said, "is civilization." Funny, most people think civilization's skyscrapers and subways. You define it as eating well and deductive reasoning. "Precisely," he said. "The former sustains life, the latter justifies it." I couldn't argue with that, though I tried. "For a man who hates the world, you sure keep saving pieces of it." He looked mildly offended. "I do not hate the world. I dislike its inefficiencies." "Which includes murder, apparently." "Indeed. It is the most vulgar form of problem-solving." I leaned back. "For a man who never leaves home, you sure make murder feel domestic." He exhaled through his nose, the Wolfe equivalent of a smile. "Phooey." We let the silence sit for a while, companionable and solid. Outside, a delivery truck clattered past, and the sound faded into the afternoon hum. Wolfe set his empty glass on the table. "Archie." "Yeah?" "Remind me tomorrow to instruct Mr. Panzer regarding the Draper Trust account. Loose ends annoy me." "Sure thing. Anything else?" "Yes. Close the windows before you leave. I detest drafts." That was Wolfe, solving murders one day, waging war on air currents the next. I straightened the desk, shut the file drawer, and looked around the office. The globe gleamed, the books were lined up like jurors awaiting sentence, and the air smelled faintly of orchids drifting down from the upper floor. The Brownstone, fortress and stage, had resumed its role as the quietest battleground in Manhattan. I looked over at Wolfe. He was already half asleep, the afternoon sun painting his features with the calm of a man who'd restored order to a disorderly world. "Boss," I said softly, "you ever think about taking a vacation?" He didn't open his eyes. "Archie, my orchids require me. The world requires sense. Between the two, I am enslaved." "That's poetic," I said. "It's factual," he murmured. I stood, slipped on my jacket, and headed toward the door. Outside, New York went on pretending it was civilized. Inside, Nero Wolfe had proved it, at least for the day.